Alrighty, hi! This is episode 12 in my tutorial series, and today I'll be showing you how I make the legs of the character that started it all, Son Goku. Oh, and I'm excited to announce that this video is sponsored by Skillshare. I was so excited when I got the initial email from Skillshare regarding this sponsorship because I really do believe they're one of the best services out there. I found it thanks to another YouTuber called Draw with Jazza who had a 2-hour video course on Skillshare about how to start a YouTube channel. This was really helpful when I was starting out and making me believe in my channel and believe that this was a possible career path. And so that's a course I absolutely recommend if you're just interested in what goes into making a YouTube channel work and what the process is like. And Skillshare has many courses like that one, over 25,000 in fact. More on that later though. Onto the leg tutorial. Always begin with the frame, and the frame of the legs is basically the same as the arms. You start with a T-joint, which is made like this. We have a pin, then the second layer of the pin, then a pivot wrapped as tightly as possible around that while still being able to rotate. And by having double-sided tape on this side, it will stick to itself when it wraps around, making the whole process a lot easier. Then there's a long piece of card the same width as the pivot that is wrapped around, and this also has some double-sided tape on the inside. Then grab another tube, and that will be stuck in here with some glue getting added to this slot here, so it's stuck in place, and then this piece of card will wrap around that tube of paper so it's nice and cozy. And once the glue dries, this will be strong, but the legs are supporting the whole upper body, and some of these guys have pretty big upper body. So for the legs, I usually do just a little bit extra to make it just a little bit stronger. I dub it the reinforced T-joint. Is that good? All you do is wrap another layer of paper around the lever section of the joint until you have like a little gap here. Then you grab another piece of card to wrap around, the same as the one before, and you're going to put some glue into this tiny little gap. So not only does it have this extra piece of card making it less likely to tear under stress, when the glue dries, there will also be a thin layer of plastic to reinforce it further. Oh, and don't forget to color the outermost layer of this joint. This will be exposed in the final product after all. Oh, and by the way, to tighten the joints, I feed thin strips of tape around the pivot, closing the gap between the pin and the pivot. And doing this makes everything really tight and strong so it can stand on its own, but it also makes rotating the thing without the paper bending or tearing a lot more difficult, which is why you reinforce the joint in the first place. And finally, grab a piece of cardboard or card or whatever and make sure it's big enough to wrap around the pin. Trace the ends of the pin as little circles to cut out holes the same size as the pin. Stick that through and glue the whole thing around from both sides. This is why the pin has that inner layer sticking out to begin with, so it can be glued from the inside and the outside. And you do the same thing for the knees and the ankles. So it's the same method as the arms, but it does get a little unique with the second hip joint. See, for the shoulders I have both joints sliding into this big wide tube that also has the neck going around the outside of that. The hips, however, are a lot narrower and supporting a lot more of the body. So how do you make them stronger? I used to do the hips the exact same way as the shoulders, but I wanted the joints to be bigger. I wanted the levers longer. So now I do it like this, where one of the legs overlaps the other, resulting in bigger, stronger hips. All you do is you make one hip joint first, like we've done, then you start the second hip joint by wrapping a tube of paper around the lever of the first hip joint, and that becomes the lever for the second hip joint. And then you make the rest the exact same way. And for the hips you make 2 more tubes, one to wrap around the bigger hip joint and then another to wrap around the waist joint of your upper body. Then those 2 tubes will be glued perpendicular to each other, and then you wrap some card and put some glue in the gaps to make that thing nice and strong. That's it. It's actually the same as the neck. You see, it's like a puzzle. It's just the one good idea, the one piece, and everything else is built off of that. I believe in doing the best you can with what you have today. That was literally the reason I started making paper models, was because I only had paper and tape and the materials I used for drawing, and I wanted some toys or just 3D representations of the characters that I liked in my own style. And with the internet and websites like YouTube that this video is coming to you from, and Skillshare, there is more opportunity than ever before to learn and grow. And I think that's awesome. So Skillshare is an online learning community with over 25,000 different courses to choose from. Even my favorite author right now, Simon Sinek, has his own course, which is just amazing. So an annual subscription to Skillshare costs just $10 a month, and you get access to everything on there. But today, the first 500 subscribers to click the link below get a 2-month free trial. That's pretty good. Whether there is a skill that you want to learn or you're just curious about how things work like I am, Skillshare is a great resource that I both use and recommend. Anyway, I'm just really grateful and thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video because I think it's a great website that everyone should try for themselves. And so now that the hips are all done and they attach onto the upper body, all that's left to do is to attach the knees and the ankles. Now it's just about turning both sides of each joint into a smooth cylinder that can easily slide into another cylinder. Just grab some paper, roll it up so it fits into the piece of card. Then I like to wrap just another layer of paper around the outside to smooth the surface out. That way, a piece of card doesn't flick up and get caught on something when it's rotating inside the leg. Then just wrap additional cylinders around what will be the thighs here. And these additional cylinders will be glued into the card piece for the hip joint. It's the same deal for the ankles. These card pieces will be turned into smooth cylinders the exact same way, and then they will have additional cylinders wrapped around them, which will be glued to the levers of the knee joint. Actually, no. What I do is I grab a second piece of card and wrap them around with some just glue in between. Next thing to do is to reinforce the hips and the knees, because right now all that's holding these legs together are these thin pieces of card which will totally bend or tear under any kind of pressure. So just like the T-joint, I like to wrap an additional piece of card around, filling in the gaps with glue. I go pretty crazy with the glue here, the more the better as far as I'm concerned. And once it's dry, cut out some little slots for the joints to actually bend through. Now we move on to the final key, making sure the damn thing stands. Fun fact, Kenshiro was actually the first paper model I made that could consistently stand on his own. All the others before him would actually just fall on their face within minutes. So, see, he wanted to fall then and he didn't. What a champ. You're my hero, Kenshiro. I had to design a locking mechanism to be put in place, so the joints didn't have to constantly be under pressure. The first one is the knee. This one's pretty obvious. Many action figures do it, and that's just making a kneecap or something of the sort. I'd make it like this, for example, and that's just here to stop the leg from bending once it hits it. So just bend the knee and glue it on. Wait for it to dry, then cut out a shape in the upper section here for the kneecap to slot into. Done. You get it? Cool. Okay, the ankle. I'm particularly proud of this idea, but first we have to make the foot. So cut down these long tubes to about 1 centimeter long, just so they fit within the foot. Slide another tube around those for rotation, then make the foot and glue it to this tube on the inside. Okay, so how would you actually make the foot like this? It's basically the same way a cube is made from 6 squares covering all sides. This is gonna fold together that way as well. You have the bottom, the sides, and then the top. You don't have the front since his feet are pointy, and you don't have the back because that needs to be open so the ankle joint can go in there. Then just color in the foot the way you've done in your drawing so it looks like the drawing when it folds together, and then just fold it together. Bring all those little gaps together with some tape and then lace the inside with some glue and hopefully show enough of it on camera so it visually makes sense to your audience. I gotta get better at that step. Once your foot gets to this point here where you have this kind of tunnel in the back, all that's left to do is to take that tube around your ankle joint and kind of just stuff it in there and glue it in so it stays in place like that. And then the pin hopefully slides out and bam. I'll glue that in after to make sure it's strong, and then I'll have my foot with an ankle pivot and of course an ankle bend. And so the back of the foot will still have a bottom section extend all the way back like this so it can neatly slot in there. And if you had a character with a little heel, the bottom of the ankle would actually be raised slightly above the ground. And it's really important to fill this gap with something solid, since that is supporting the weight of the whole figure. Of course, that's what the heels do. And there you have it, an ankle joint that pivots and bends, everything you'd want. So how do I lock the ankles? Well, first you want to make this gap a little bit bigger so he can actually bend his foot forward, allowing for that forward movement. The issue with allowing this much range, however, is over time, characters can tend to lean forward if the joints aren't particularly strong enough. But inspired by Doomfist's foot design, I realized that you can have a fixed structure here just above the point where it bends. So stopping the foot from moving because it hits this part. And if you put that fixed structure on the leg, where the ankle joint lever is tucked into the leg, it can't bend. But you can still have your ankle maneuverability by simply sliding the ankle out, revealing that extra space for the joint to bend into. And this is extremely effective because gravity is on your side. As the figure wants to lean forward, this solid point on the lower leg will press against the ankle, as I mentioned, stopping it from bending. And you know the ankle won't slide down to allow for that bend because to do so, it would have to push against the weight of the entire model. So the very thing that would cause your model to lean forward, its weight, is the same thing that is locking the ankles in place, stopping them from actually bending forward. And of course, you can actually just slide the ankle down, bend the foot forward. This part actually needs to slide a bit further forward to make even more of a gap. And then the leg can still collapse down on top of the foot, pressing it so it can't bend any further. So its own weight is what locks the thing in place. It doesn't matter how tight the ankle is. This is really loose, you see. I just think that's really damn cool. And those are the basic principles behind making the legs with paper. It's just 3 keys. The first key is making the joint strong enough by feeding thin pieces of tape through the pivot until it's tight. The second key is to reinforce the joints with a second or even third piece of card and glue in between, as I showed. And the third key is to build in the locking mechanism in the ankle and the knees to make sure the joints don't bend after a certain point so they will continue to stand up on their own. And now all that's left to do is get creative and make the thing actually look good. And like every other part, I start with the structure pieces. Just these parts here that I cut in the shape of the muscle and stuck to the frame at the thickest point. I just have the structure piece glued to the frame in each of these key areas, like the lower quads and the upper quads, the inner thigh, the hamstrings, oh, and one for the calf too. And these pieces are just here to dictate the path of the paper when it wraps around. And once these parts are on, all you do with the paper is you wrap it around these structure pieces indicating the thickest point, and then you cut the paper so it folds back towards the thinnest point, which is the frame. You've already got the main outline of your part with the structure pieces, and the paper is just there to fill in the gaps. You see, it's really simple. I've just taken the shape of the muscle from my drawing, stretched it out so it wraps around the structure, and then made 4 or 5 cuts in the paper so it can fold back towards the frame, filling in the gaps and creating a more round shape. But it's the structure pieces that shape the model. And sometimes this can get pretty crazy, like with the calf here. I started with just a regular rectangular strip of paper, and I stuck it onto the calf frame with some double-sided tape, and then I just went crazy cutting the paper and folding it back in all the little areas I thought would work to get the shape that I wanted. And when I had a shape that I wanted, I removed this rough copy and cut it open again, so I could see where all the gaps in the paper needed to go to shape the part the way that I like. That's what these cuts are representing. They're just representing that gap in the paper that will be closed by pulling the paper together and taping it or something. And that's how I figure it out, because even to me, who does this a lot, it's pretty inconceivable that this weird monstrosity of a piece of paper with all these cuts all over the place would become a clean and curved calf. But once I cut open this random piece of paper, I'd trace that onto a new paper, color it, and do the outlines to make it look like a drawing. And then I fold that back together and glue it on as my final product. It's a simple step-by-step process. Just think about one thing at a time. Everyone can do this. And when I break down the leg into its individual parts like this, and then I just follow the same process for this part and that part and the next part, add them all together, now I have something complex. Being creative isn't magically manifesting something out of nothing. It's not. It's breaking down something into simple forms that can be easily understood. When you understand something, you can simplify it and break it down until you get to the essence of what that something is. Alright, and now the final thing to show you is the hip sections. I start off by taking this tube here that is going around the legs, and I just, of course, wrap another cylinder around that can slide up and down and rotate. This part's important. Then, grab a shape like this here, where it simply just has a bottom and a top, and then this will fold around, forming this kind of donut or ring around the waist section. And you'll notice that the bottom section is a little bit thicker than the top section, just so we can actually capture the shape of the hip sort of starting wide and then narrowing as they get towards the waist. And so for that reason, this piece of paper that we'll be wrapping around will have to be kind of curved upwards a little bit so it flares out like this. But it doesn't matter if you don't get it exactly right, because, I mean, I didn't. Also color in the top and bottom of these sections here, because they will be visible on the final thing. And, well, hopefully when you put yours together, it's straight and not crooked and lopsided.
Nah, I'm kidding. I just added some paper and glue to even this out a little bit. And now I have a piece like this that is colored pretty nicely, if I do say so myself. And here's the trick to clothing. Draw the creases and folds like you would a 2D illustration. Then go ahead and actually fold the paper as well. Make real creases in the material as I'm doing here to give that three-dimensional depth. Then slide the waist section all the way down so there's barely a gap between it and the legs. And then plug in the upper body of your character and make sure this clothing piece is cut in a way that allows you to fold it all the way around and meet the torso so there's no gaps at all. Something like this. And trust me, this is difficult to line up, so try with some scrap piece of paper first before you spend an hour coloring and drawing in all the detail just for it to not fit. This section and this ring around his hip joint can slide up and down while rotating, which means when he kicks his leg forward, we can move this piece up to make space for the leg to move into. And when his leg is down, it can slide back down, covering the gaps. And if need be, you could even slide the torso up to give more room for the hips to slide up so he can kick even higher. I think this is a really cool feature, allowing for both aesthetic and articulation. I'm proud of it. So again, the main technique for any kind of clothing is to just make small folds in the paper along the creases of the clothing and figure out how that flat piece of paper might need to curve to accurately go around the shape of the body part. It's all just trial and error. There isn't a consistent template or anything like that you can follow. It's tough and it's different every time. So be creative. Think for yourself and decide what you like best, what you feel works best, and as long as you invest the time and do what you can, you'll get some good results. But most importantly, you have something of your own that you created, and I think that's pretty cool.
And that about wraps up my leg tutorial video. I covered all I could think of, and I now believe you have the techniques and principles to make something for yourself, so go ahead and give it a try. And now it's time for comment of the week, and I'm doing two because it's been a while. So to Dropsler321 and Bubba Drub Dub, thank you for your comments. It's really nice to scroll down in the comments of my video and see such encouraging words, and they both genuinely really made me smile. I appreciate it. And that's the video. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you got something out of it, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.